the entire goal is to make sure that people who are immigrants see their migration journey as a superpower. It's not something that's bad. It's not this parasite. It's not an invasion. It's not that I'm unwelcome here. And I can find that power inside of me. And it took me forever to figure that out. And so I think so much of my goal in Convivir was just to be like, hey, young people, like, let's see if we could get through this journey at an earlier point in life so that when you're in middle school, when you're in high school, when you're in college, when you're in the world, no one will make them doubt that they're powerful and amazing, even if they've migrated, if they haven't, whatever it is.
Welcome to the Power of Community on the Voice of Montbello Podcast. I'm your host, Estrella, and today I'm here with Tania Chairez, founder and CEO of Convivir, Colorado. Thank you for joining us today, Tania.
Thank you for having me.
In this special podcast series, we speak with powerful educators and entrepreneurs who have participated in the Moonshot Fellowship here in Denver, Colorado. Moonshot is an amazing fellowship that empowers educators to reimagine education and embrace their creativity to develop, innovate, and transformative experiences with youth. All right, so Tania, can you tell us a bit about yourself? Where are you from?
So many places. I think my journey starts in Mexico. I was born in Nuevo Casas Grandes, Chihuahua, Mexico, and I came to the United States and was raised in Phoenix, Arizona. And then I went off to college in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, returned to Phoenix, Arizona, and made it to Denver in 2016. So a little bit all over the place.
All over the place. And we noticed you lived in Arizona for a while. What was Arizona like for you?
Very stressful. I'm an undocumented immigrant, and I currently have DACA, which protects me from deportation. But at the time when I was being raised in Phoenix, Arizona, I did not have any kind of protection, and neither did my family. And we were living in Maricopa County, which was ran by this really anti-immigrant sheriff named Joe Arpaio. And he was pretty terrible. And so I would see him on the news every day just talking all the negative things you can imagine about immigrants. And it always felt like a personal attack. It always felt like I shouldn't be there, like I wasn't supposed to be there. So it was not a fun time in Phoenix, Arizona. And somehow when I went back as an adult, I thought, I can handle this. I can do this. As an adult, I've built in all of the skills. But even then, it was not my favorite place to be. And I know so many people who have turned those experiences with racism into like their guiding power, and they're doing amazing things in Phoenix. But that just wasn't the case for me.
Yeah. And do you think you would go back now that you're older?
Ooh, maybe not. I'll go and I'll visit. I definitely still know people over there. And it's a place that I love dearly for the landscape and the humans and so many different things. But at the end of the day, the politics in Phoenix are not where I want to be spending my time.
Definitely. Why did your family decide to go to Phoenix, Arizona and not somewhere else, if you know?
Yeah, I have asked them these questions before, and it kind of always feels like it was by chance how we ended up in different places. I'm not entirely sure how much of each state people in Mexico know. I feel like every time I've heard family members in Mexico talk about the United States is always like El Norte, like the whole of the U.S. is one big thing instead of nuance between each of the places. And so I kind of think that the main way they chose Arizona was because my aunt lived there and they wanted to go somewhere where they knew someone. So we were in Phoenix with my aunt. And then actually she left and went over to New Mexico. So my parents tried to go to New Mexico for a little bit, didn't like it there. And then I think the only other place they knew was Denver because I had a different aunt who we used to visit here. So I think it's just following family members around.
So wherever the path takes you,
Yeah.
around the family.
Yeah.
Basically. So so there's a story behind every decision to migrate. What was yours or your parents, if you know?
Yeah. A lot of it I've come to label in a very formal way as economic refugees. But the story is my two families were from different parts of the city. So I was born in No Casas Grandes, which is a little city. And then my mom is from a little town beyond the city, and my dad is from a different town beyond the city. And I come from farm workers. So both sides of the family were doing different types of things with farming. My mom's side was doing, all the crops. They had corn and potatoes and beans, all the things. And then my dad's side of the family was more around like cattle and pig and selling meat. And then when I was born in the city, my parents tried to figure out what kind of jobs they could find in the city. So my mom was a retail worker, and my dad essentially had any job you can imagine. I think that's just part of the hustle that's ingrained in so many of us. But he's certainly shared how he used to pick fruit, how he used to be a taxi driver. The one that I remember the most is he was a door-to-door salesman. So he would sell jewelry by walking to everyone's homes. But he had at least a dozen other jobs in order to try and sustain us. Whenever my mom talks about our life in Mexico, she always describes it as like el cuartito, because we literally lived in a room. And in this room was where I learned how to walk. And so we had the table in the middle, and I would just kind of walk around the table in my, I don't know what you call it in English, but the thing with the wheels that you're like walking around in. So that's where I learned how to walk. But my parents wanted more. They wanted a life that was sustainable, a life that wasn't so restrained by cartels and violence, and one that they could feel that they could provide more of if we migrated. So we came to the United States. And then after Phoenix, Arizona was really stressful, it sort of felt like the politics in Arizona pushed them out. So then we became migrants for a second time, right? Leaving from Phoenix, Arizona, coming over to Denver. My parents came to Aurora, Colorado in 2011 because in 2010, SB 1070 had passed in Phoenix, Arizona. And so my dad could no longer find work there. So both times my family has moved have been due to economic reasons.
Economic reasons overall, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, do you think if you were to have stayed in Phoenix, things would have been different rather than you moving over here to Denver?
Maybe. It's hard to tell. I think I've learned now over the years that there are ways to turn some of those really stressful experiences into really power building fire. So maybe that's what would have happened. But ultimately, I do think my family, it feels happier here. So that's much more important to me.
Yeah, just overall that home and happy feeling.
Yeah.
Somewhere that actually feels like home.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so, what was the most difficult part about leaving Mexico?
I think it's the people and the culture that I left behind. While my mom was working retail and my dad had a dozen jobs, my grandma was my caretaker. And so I would spend most of my time with my grandma, learning how to make tortillas and bizcochitos and like all of the random things that you do with grandma. And it sort of felt like as soon as I came to the United States, I didn't have access to that. I couldn't engage in the same way. Phone calls. It's not the same. And alongside that cultural piece of, I don't know how to make tortillas like my grandma. I don't know how to make bizcochitos like my grandma. And it's because I didn't have that access anymore. I left when I was 5.5. So I like to joke around. I'm an educator. I like to joke around with my students that I never actually finished kindergarten because I left kindergarten in Mexico and then started first grade in the US. And so all of my education has been in the US. I sort of feel very Americanized, very like now I went to Mexico this spring on advanced parole because I have DACA. And it was this wild feeling of I'm home and I'm a stranger, both at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the things that I wish I didn't have to feel. Like I wish I had a strong understanding of like, yes, I'm home, but it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, it feels like home, but you're just missing it's like something's missing inside of you that I don't know how to explain it to you, but yeah,
Yeah.
you know that feeling, where you feel out of place, but you know it's home.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And what do you think was the most difficult part about coming here to the US?
The language. Oh, absolutely. I would cry every single day in first grade. And that's like all I remember about first grade is coming home and crying every day. I remember nothing else. And it's wild because I remember very specific moments of like my teachers trying to help me. But even with simple things like art projects, I think they thought that it would be easy because I wouldn't have to figure out words, but I still couldn't understand their instructions. So they would just give me like construction paper and markers and scissors, and I'd be like, okay, now what? And so I just would go home and cry that entire first year. I think it was second grade when I finally got assigned a peer interpreter, which is also wild because at second grade, you're 8 years old? And so I had another 8-year-old trying to translate for me. And then in third grade, I think I had finally started getting a hold of the language. And then in fourth grade, I became that peer interpreter for all the other students who were coming in. And so, language acquisition happens really fast when you're young. And I know that now, but in the moment, it just felt terrible. I hated it.
Yeah. I have a sister and she experienced the same thing as you. She came from Mexico and then she studied over here like you. She did kinder over there and then first grade over here, and she had told me about how it was like just rough. Like she wouldn't understand anyone and she would just cry. So yeah, definitely I feel like terrible. Yeah, so schools should just, I feel like, get more like Spanish speaking teachers
We
or
should be
like
bilingual.
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I don't know what the laws are anymore, but when I was younger in Arizona, they definitely passed some laws to make English the only language. And so we couldn't actually do anything in Spanish in the schools, even though the vast majority of my peers, we all spoke Spanish. So from the very, very beginning, because I was hearing all of that on the news of Spanish is not allowed, English is the only thing, I got very, very used to English everywhere in the world, Spanish only at home. And that is very much how my brain is still wired today. It's really crazy.
Yeah, how it affects someone. Yeah, just definitely I could see how that affects someone. Yeah, and so moving on to DACA, we notice you have a DACA status. How did your life change once you attained that status?
Everything changed in a lot of ways. Where to even begin? I was an organizer when I went off to college, mostly because I was angry and I wanted somewhere to funnel it out in a positive way. And me and my peers, we did so much to get DACA. And I think now as I get older, it feels like sometimes we've forgotten how that happened. But it wasn't like a president was just like, here you go, we're going to do this nice thing. It was that undocumented youth across the entire nation were getting arrested and were raising awareness about what was happening. And then because of all of that happening consecutively in different cities with different people, with large numbers of students, then we were able to get DACA. But it all happened really slowly and really quickly at the same time, like the way I remember it. So I participated in civil disobedience in March of 2012. Other people had been doing so since fall 2011 because the DREAM Act had failed in winter of 2010. And so it's sort of a little snowball. And then a few months after my civil disobedience, DACA was announced. It was like around the same time that I was on the cover of Time magazine with Jose Antonio Vargas, who was a journalist who came out as undocumented publicly. And so everything was sort of happening. And I had to analyze it very quickly because everyone was asking me, how do you feel? You got what you wanted. And my answer was always, no, actually, I didn't get what I wanted. What I wanted was much, much more than this. This is a Band-Aid. And I can't believe that we're not getting more. And I think what is infuriating to me now is that we've had it for so long. I mean, that was 2012. My first work permit I got, I think it was like February of 2013, and we're about to be in 2024. I literally cannot believe this has been going for so long. But it did change things in a very positive way, right? Like, I went to college thinking the only thing I could do was start my own business, and came out of college knowing that I could get a license to become a teacher. So I went into education, and that certainly has impacted like the rest of my trajectory. And the fact that I know I have protections from deportation, like that definitely makes my mom and my dad feel a little bit better. So it's very complicated. It's good, it's bad, it's all of the things.
Yeah, it has its good things, but it also has its downside. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I feel like it took so long for like DACA to like become a thing, and it's just like it's so unfair. How might losing your DACA status affect your life right now?
One thing that I actually think about often that most people don't, because obviously the first thought is if I were to not have DACA, there's actually a lot of consequences. The first thought is, how in the world am I going to lead a nonprofit if I cannot be employed by my nonprofit? So an undocumented person can own a company, but when you're employed, you're not an owner, you're still an employee. And so there's like a logistical question there of how would I be able to run my nonprofit? Then there's all the personal ramifications of no longer protected from deportation, and the government has all my info. Great. Love that. Sarcasm, by the way. Definitely don't love that. And then you keep peeling back the layers. And the one thing that I think about a lot is the fact that I'm from Mexico. Like, that is my nationality right now, my citizenship. My partner, my husband, is from Chile. His nationality is over there. So if I lose DACA, if he loses DACA, if DACA is gone everywhere, and we have to be deported to our countries of origin, I'm not even going to be in the same place as my husband. And that is somehow worse than all the other things. I think I've gotten to an age where I'm like, okay, like I can imagine how to rebuild. I can imagine how to make things work, but I need the people I love around me. That means my partner, that means my parents and my siblings. And that's the stressful part.
Right, just not having the person that you spent so long with, just building something and then just losing it all, right? Yeah, I feel like that would be difficult just having someone apart from you. And not even that, it wouldn't be the same as like not like as if you were like calling someone, like, it wouldn't be the same as like just having them with you.
Right.
Right. Yeah, and overall, how do you think your family is doing after the migration?
Comes in waves of good and bad. It depends on who's the president. Depends on the economy, depends on the news. I feel like people don't talk about how the news impacts everything often enough. The news impacts so many things. When people are framing immigrants as a crisis or an invasion, that impacts how you feel and how you live life. versus when people talk about immigrants as, oh, let's welcome these folks in. Like, how can we support them? That is a very different experience. And so, yeah, ups and downs everywhere. I think my dad, as long as he has a job, he's happy. He's all like, cool, this is all I need. My mom, it's been incredible watching her journey across the years of like, I think back when I was younger, so much of it was the fear of being perceived like a foreigner. Like, we would not speak Spanish in public. She would be like, no, we're not doing that. But now she talks to everyone, everywhere. She shares resources and she's like, hey, I found this workshop over here. Like, you should go to that. And so it's really interesting to see how she sort of built up her power, and how my dad is building up his stability. And my siblings, I mean, have built an entire life here. I'm the only one that is undocumented. My 3 siblings are all U.S. citizens. They were all born here. So for them, it's also just a whole new world that they've built, right? Like, I have no idea what would have happened if we stayed in Mexico. Their life is entirely here.
Yeah. Well, I'm good. Things have been going good for you and your family. I'm glad that like you got the ideal experience, I guess you could say. I don't know if that's the word you could use, but
Yeah, I think that is a good way to frame it. Things have gone well, like generally.
all around, yeah. But I mean, yeah, I feel like definitely it does have its bad sides, like racial profiling, definitely big thing here in the US. So yeah. But overall, it sounds like it's been going pretty good overall. So that's good. Where did your family find strength in tough times?
I think it always comes back to people. My mom is very social, so she makes friends wherever she goes. And I think whenever our family feels connected and whenever we're all in the same place, my mom and dad are like happy that we're in that spot together. We weren't together always because I left for college and then I left for teaching. So it wasn't until 2016 that we were all in the same spot. And even then, my sister went off to college for a little bit, came back and transferred schools. So now we're finally all in the same nuclear spot. But having each other is really helpful. Having friends and people who check on us and support us is really helpful. And I think that's really where we find all of our strengths.
Yeah, support is the number one thing, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how do you think migration has changed you?
Well, it has changed everything. And that's kind of an existential question that I ask myself at like 2 a.m. sometimes of who would I be if I hadn't migrated? Would I be the same person? So I don't know the answer to that. But I do know that my journey as an immigrant has made me very strong, has made me a problem solver, because I see obstacles and I'm like, no, there's a way around that for sure. And I'm comfortable with taking calculated risks of just to move things forward. And I think it's opened my eyes to all the possibilities in the world. And some of these things you wouldn't think are coming directly from migration, but they are. Like the fact that my parents could see a different life and could make a strong choice to move to a whole nother country. And for me to see that as a 5-year-old and for me to go through everything I've been through and then come out on the other end and have things be generally okay, that makes me strong. That makes me a problem solver. That makes me someone who's going to go find the options in the world.
Yeah. It's like an inspiration to you, right? Just to keep going and like just it's like, as an example, like they went through all that, but at the end everything was okay. So yeah, that could definitely be like an inspiration. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I think a lot of times it's also a reminder, right, that things aren't always okay. Things aren't always good for everyone. And so if my family is willing to sacrifice a lot, if I'm willing to sacrifice a lot, then it also just makes me so much more aware of all the injustices across our country, across the world, and how much I want to be a part of finding solutions to that.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully you make it. Well, I mean, you are already making a change, but hopefully you continue to making that big change. Yeah. And so, what was your motive behind Convivir Colorado?
So I was an educator, but before I was an educator, I was a community organizer. And so organizer, educator, doing all the things. I was moving around the world, not around the world, around the educational sphere, working with lots of different ages of students. Like I had my middle schoolers, I had my high schoolers, I had my college students. At one point, I worked with parents, and everything was around like their early childhood kids. And so I sort of saw the whole range of how our students go through the education system here. And at every single moment in those particular demographics, I was always uplifting undocumented immigrants. I was always talking about how our undocumented students could move ahead. And at the end of the day, it didn't matter at which point I was like pressing a button. I wasn't helping enough. I wasn't making enough of something. Like I think of our social issues as like big balls of yarn. And I was trying to pull at different strings to untangle the yarn. And I just wasn't getting anywhere. The yarn was still there. It was still full of all the knots. And I joined this fellowship called Moonshot Adventures, where I had lots of support to sort of push me over the edge, because launching an organization definitely feels scary. And so I had people who were like, no, you could do this. And so they just kind of ushered me out. And it was lovely to see that I could sort of attack this yarn from a different angle and in a way that made me feel like I was making more of an impact. Yeah.
Yeah, so support, yeah, definitely going back to the support part where you said back. It sounds like it's all based like on support, basically, like just having those people to push you to feel
Yeah.
like you're doing something. Yeah, definitely. And how does Convivir Colorado support your goals?
Yes. So when I started Convivir, we did, all of the designing and the planning and the piloting, all of the whole journey of preparing through Moonshot. And then afterwards, it was just kind of let's go out into the world and see what happens. And then the pandemic changed everything. So at the beginning, it was interesting because we were just kind of out there trying to help people in what they needed immediately. And then slowly we started coming back to like the root of the mission and how the entire goal is to make sure that people who are immigrants see their migration journey as a superpower. It's not something that's bad. It's not this parasite. It's not an invasion. It's not that I'm unwelcome here. And I can find that power inside of me. And it took me forever to figure that out. And so I think so much of my goal in Convivir was just to be like, hey, young people, like, let's see if we could get through this journey at an earlier point in life so that when you're in middle school, when you're in high school, when you're in college, when you're in the world, no one will make them doubt that they're powerful and amazing, even if they've migrated, if they haven't, whatever it is. And so I think we're on our way to working towards that, right? Like it's never going to be easy or perfect, but our students are having a great time exploring how their migrant journeys have affected all parts of their life. And yeah, I'm hopeful that the future will look better.
Yeah, so just empowering them to start a better future for people. Yeah. And how is Convivir Colorado speaking into a new future?
I think that's a better question for my students themselves. I like to give them as much of the space as possible. I sort of feel like I already did as much as I could for politics, for example. Like I already lobbied more than everyone I know. I already participated in civil disobedience. I already like analyzed policies. I did research, all of the things. And where I want to be spending my time is in building up well-being, building up individual power, building up collective power. And so for my students, we use this little circle that came out of this really incredible woman's mind. Her name is Deepa, and it's called the social change for ecosystem roles. I'm going to get that mixed up somewhere. But essentially, we talk to our students about how they can do any of these roles and make a difference in the world. And so our students are going out into the world being artists and changing the world as artists. They're going out and being healers, frontline responders, and caregivers. And I love that they can be whatever they want to be and still feel like they're part of pulling at this yarn. Because I think that's exactly how the world works. We're not all going to be doing the same thing. And so finding power in all of the different ways, they're going to change the world in whatever way they want.
Definitely. Yeah, with whatever they decide to do, yeah, they're definitely gonna have that support and feel like they can do something better,
Exactly.
something bigger and better than what they're already doing. Yeah. And what do you see as a top issue for undocumented students today?
It depends on which undocumented students. There are many young people who have been in the US undocumented a little longer. Right after DACA was sort of rescinded and they stopped taking new applicants, a large population of young people became undocumented. And we also have a lot of newcomers who are coming into the country maybe this year, maybe last year, and they're waiting for some kind of process to help them out, whether it's asylum or something else. And as they wait, they're in this weird undocumented limbo. And so both of those populations have different needs. Our newcomers, I would say, are looking for some like basic needs, like we're looking for housing, we're looking for food and clothing. Whereas some of the folks who have been here a little longer, I think so much of what I hear is their concern is mental health, which is honestly what we go back to all the time at Convivir, where once you've been in this country and you've experienced the xenophobia and how people talk about us, it's kind of hard not to take it personally. And so a lot of our youth are struggling with mental health and with trying to figure out how to navigate all these systems to function in academics and school and careers. So there's kind of a lot going on, a lot. Basically, I feel like migration intersects with everything. So any kind of social issue you can think of, yeah, we're also in there.
Yeah, so basically just migration in general is basically maybe what I got out of it. Yeah, is basically when just the top issue as different groups need different needs depending on their status.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All situations are different, so they're all going to need different things, but everything you can think of is on the table.
All right. So let's talk more about the Moonshot Fellowship.
Sure.
So what was the most important lesson you learned that you still carry with you today from Moonshot?
The most important lesson I learned to ask for help. I think that's so hard. And it's one of those things where we try and talk to our students all the time and say, please ask someone for help. Everyone's willing to help you out. And when everyone is offering help, it's sometimes overwhelming, right, to our students. But for me, just knowing that there's a group of people who are always going to be there to answer my questions, to point me in a new direction, or to do whatever to make sure that I'm feeling like there's progress, like I'm feeling like things are going. That is really exciting. And I guess so much of this conversation keeps coming back to people, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I like that.
Yeah, definitely. Because basically, yeah, you need people to just keep going in life, just that support and just having someone to talk to, basically. Yeah. It's a big essential in life, definitely. Just a big motivation. Yeah. And so think of where you were when you did the Moonshot Fellowship, where you were at
Ooh.
personally and professionally. What does your Moonshot experience mean to you?
It definitely changed the trajectory of my career. First of all, I did not know that I could run a nonprofit. And maybe that's obvious, but I'll frame it in the way of as an undocumented immigrant woman, so much of society is not meant for me. And so I assumed that my place in the world was always going to be pushing against the systems from the outside and just kind of like hating on all of these things that have made it really hard for me to function and really hard for me to, thrive in this country. And I think Moonshot was a time when I could actually see myself as an organizational leader, as someone who the ideas in my brain like weren't terrible. Like actually they were on the other end, they were good, and I could use them to change my ecosystem. So it was a mindset shift for me. And I mentioned earlier that it felt like they just kind of pushed me out to fly. And it was lovely to have humans sort of flying alongside me, because we could make mistakes and catch each other, and we could support each other on the way. And so a lot of this was learning how to take risks and learning how to believe in myself, and take ownership of the power that I have as well.
Yeah, so it basically showed you how to empower yourself and just build that community with people. Yeah, that guide you along the way. And describe how the Moonshot community has impacted you.
I think a very important part has been learning that the opportunities, the ideas, the flexibility is almost endless. And maybe this is part of the mindset shift for me, where as an immigrant who was raised in Phoenix, Arizona, so much of my life was trying to fit in the little square. I needed to fit in because if I didn't fit in, people were going to find out that I was undocumented and I was going to get deported. And that's not good. So now, as I'm older, Moonshot sort of had this like double job with me of like I needed to unlearn that, because actually some of these systems, all of these other humans around me agree that they're not okay, and we can change them. And I don't have to try and fit in the little square. I can try and go over to a circle or a triangle or whatever. So it was a lot of learning that there's just endless ways to see the world, and trying to fit into society's expectation isn't always the right answer.
Yeah, definitely. When you mentioned that, like, you said that you wanted to fit into like a little square, like, do you think like what do you think would have happened if you have tried to go in that way?
I mean, I definitely wouldn't have started an organization. I also probably wouldn't be happy, because I would be sort of lying about who I am, not being my authentic self, not bringing up all my ideal values and ways of caring for the world. So I'm really glad that I stopped trying to fit in the square.
Yeah, I'm glad that it all worked out at the end, and I'm glad that you realized that you didn't like have to fit in, and that like you being your own person, like it it really opens like other people's eyes to basically just do whatever they want to do. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah.
yeah. And education is hard. What keeps you going?
We talk a lot about wellness. I think maybe as a nation, because everything is stressful, the conversations about wellness have increased. Maybe it's a hot topic. Maybe it's just us at Convivir. We talk about wellness. But I find joy in some of the like simple things in life. We started to do coloring at work. That makes me keep going. I'm like, yes, we're going to color, and then I'm going to be so excited to do all these programs, and maybe not as excited about emails, but still ready to go. I think a lot of it is also seeing, like, I'm the oldest of 4, so I have siblings who are quite literally in the education system. And so the work that I do is impacting real people, and that also keeps me going. It's just like, this isn't a random thing that's happening. These are real humans that have real stories, and they're telling me about their life. And definitely talking to our youth, hearing how all of this is impacting them, that makes me feel like we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, moving in the right direction and making a change for the better.
Yes.
Yeah. And describe your venture in a few sentences.
Absolutely. So Convivir Colorado, we do storytelling, we do art, and we do community building for any students who have been impacted by migration. So this includes your immigrants, your refugees, and your first-generation Americans. We do lots of different programs. So everything happens through storytelling and art. but it'll come out as a summer program or as arts and conversations. We have a mentorship program. We have a group of students who do public speaking, and we have our leadership council. So there's lots of different ways for students to get involved.
Yeah. And what is the best part of your day in your venture?
The best part of my day, I have to say, is hearing how excited people get about art. I was not really taught art when I was young. I think that's changing now in the United States, or at least in my ecosystem. Maybe it's because I hang out with all the Moonshot people. But I will talk to my kids, my students, and I'm like, I don't know anything about art, but I can buy you some art materials and we could figure it out together. And they get so excited and they make beautiful things. I mean, incredible things that I can't imagine making with my own hands. So the best part of my day is just seeing what their brains create. And then it's just out here as like a painting or a sculpture or a poem. So you can imagine that my office is covered in art. And then I have a lot more stuff in storage. So I can't wait for it to just all be everywhere.
Yeah, it's beautiful how like people's brains work, like how they make such beautiful things, and like it's just like I can't make that. Like,
right?
It's amazing. Like,
It's incredible.
just seeing them do it. Yeah. But all right. Thank you, Tania, for joining
Yes.
us today. It was a pleasure to have you on the show with us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for tuning in. But before we leave, Tania, please finish the sentence. Moonshot is
Moonshot is community.
community.
Yes.
All right. I love that. Thank you, Tania, for sharing. And stay tuned for the next episode, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Voice of Montbello Podcast.
You can find our episodes anywhere you listen to podcasts.
You can support our work by checking out our Instagram at Confluence Media Center.
Check the link tree in the bio to connect with us.
Be sure to rate, reviews, and follow us. Make sure you put them good. And make a donation.
This has been a Confluence Media production.